Chris, well done.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
All right. Seeing nothing for the public comment, we'll move right into new business. First item on the agenda is One Industrial Lofts LLC seeking approval of a project under MGL Chapter 121A. So, Jeff, do we want to hear from the applicant first? I mean, Mr. Michon, do you have a presentation you want to give, or you want to just be here for questions? What's easier for you?
Well, I'm actually waiting for Jane, my attorney, to get on here, and I'm not sure if she's having problems. She said she's getting on now, so I don't know what that means now.
Okay.
But I mean, if you want to ask questions, we could start with that. Here's Jane.
There's Jane.
Yep.
So, Jane, I was just talking to Mike about whether you guys want to sort of start off with a presentation, or if you want to just be available to ask questions or answer questions, or how you want to. If you have something in mind, I'm happy to give you the floor to start. It's up to you.
Yeah, I know that you all were present at the city council meeting. So, I think we'll just be available here for questions if you have anything.
Perfect. All right. So, Jeff, I think you put together some stuff to sort of walk us through this process, because this is the first time this planning board at least has dealt with a 121A as we are currently constituted. So that would probably be helpful if you want to start with that.
Yeah, thank you. I think the idea is to walk the planning board members through some of the documents that were submitted. The packet is posted on the Easthampton homepage, so it's on the website. We're calling it the landing page. So anyone who is interested in what we're looking at can access it right from the homepage, listed under Ferry Street and 121A. The process has started with the applicant submitting materials to the Department of Housing and Urban Development, and it constitutes the application. And with the application there's a lot of exhibits, and so there's materials that came with the application. And I've been trying to make sure people know that not to be too taken aback by the length of the exhibits. The packet is about 700 pages. And I'm happy to report that I would say that most of those so for example, one of those is our entire master plan. So let's say it's 200 pages. And then our entire open space plan is in there. And let's say that's 100 pages. And then there's our entire Mass Works application, which is, let's say, another 100 pages. So if you take these in big chunks, it actually becomes a little bit more manageable. One of the key documents that we'll use tonight are some finding requirements under Chapter 121A, Section 6. And so that's really what cues off this whole process. The joint public hearing was the initial presentation by the applicant, which I'm happy that everyone was in attendance for, to introduce the overall project scope. And then the city's finance subcommittee will be conducting at least one meeting, if not two, to look at the financial elements. So what do the actual numbers mean? And then the planning board in this meeting and possibly a next one will talk about these findings that relate to the condition of the property, relate to sort of compliance with the master plan, and there's a couple other findings that are required. So in a minute, I'll share my screen if it's okay with the chair and others. I tried to put together what I was calling an outline for this. So you'll see the required finding. And what I was hoping to do tonight is go into this document and walk through some of the facts, some of the documents that might support the finding, make sure that the planning board understands what the documents look like and what they generally say. And then as we go through the findings, if the planning board is generally in agreement, then that would potentially allow me to, so we continue this meeting, and it could allow me to draft actual written findings and present those back to the board for review at the next meeting. And so that gives the board, the true good faith that they review the materials and then review the findings as their own. So it's going to take a little bit. It's going to take a little bit of patience, but I am hopeful. I tried to set it up using links within the documents, so hopefully it's a little bit conducive to using Zoom. So as I gave that introduction, Jesse, I don't know if anyone has any global questions that might make sense to ask now, or whether we can just ask questions as we go.
Yeah, any questions or comments about the process that Jeff outlined, which I think makes a lot of sense? James?
I just want to say that I'm eager to go through the steps with you one by one. As I've sort of read and prepared for it, I'm hoping that, from what I've seen, this seems entirely applicable and we can get through it quickly and get this process done in a timely fashion. We have, 45 days for our part? Is that right? So if we can just start going through those steps, I'd be a happy camper.
Okay.
I have one question. I unfortunately have not been able to prepare, and I apologize for that. But what is and is not in our jurisdiction as we go through this? What can we comment on? What can we not provide comments on?
Jeff can probably provide more insight on this, but there's specific findings we have to make that I think he's going to walk us through, and that's really our purview. So,
okay.
I don't know whether we can or should address things that are outside of that, but I think that
I agree.
in the context of each of those specific findings, we can either give a thumbs up, a thumbs down, or something in between, I guess.
Okay, thank you.
Right, and that's important. And so at the end of this, so my hope for tonight is to walk through all this and then just understand that the planning board is agreeable with the findings in general, and then I'm happy to draft them. And we come back together with an actual written document, and that would ultimately be one of the final steps. Is it would constitute the planning board report, and the report goes back to City Council, and then the City Council takes the planning board report and any reporting out from the Finance Subcommittee, and they ultimately make a recommendation to the mayor whether or not to approve the package as provided or as amended, or to reject it. So that's. This is our first time doing this, so we're going to kind of embark. And I think the last thing would be that it'll be important for the applicant to jump in where appropriate to kind of explain more or add responses or input. So I think with the chair's permission, I think we want to include the applicant in this discussion because they're here, and this is not my application. It's not my project, so I think it's important that they can offer additional input where it seems appropriate.
Thank you, Jeff. That's a good point.
Okay. So section 6, I think there's 7 findings, and they're not small, they're not insubstantial. And the first one, that the proposed project area is qualified under the statutory definition of blighted, open, decadent, or substandard area established in section 1 of MGL chapter 121A. So the purpose of my report here is I'm hoping I can click right into these and maybe not read every single word verbatim, but I want to show the board where the information lies and kind of what it suggests. So if this all works, where we are here is now we're in chapter 121A, very first section, but it's kind of it's really important.
I don't see 121A. I still see your PDF.
Okay.
Oh.
Yep, that'll be helpful. So screen share is finicky, so you usually have to stop and start again. So the key definitions here that the board has to find that the project and the property meet are blighted open area, which is oh gosh, Jesse, I'm gonna get some reading time in here, I think, but.
Better you than me.
And I will not do this with all the documents, I promise, but I think these are critical findings to make sure that the property is in a condition, and interestingly, it's really suggesting that the property is in poor condition. And so Mr. Michon, just bear with us as we sort of talk about how potentially in poor condition the property is, in order to make it eligible to be entering into this agreement. So it's predominantly an open area which is detrimental to the safety, health, morals, welfare, and sound growth of a community because it is unduly costly to develop it soundly through ordinary operation of private enterprise. And so there's by reason of existence of ledge, rock, unsuitable soil, or other physical conditions, or by reasons of the necessity for unduly expensive excavation, fill, or grading, expensive foundations, retaining walls, or unduly expensive measures, waterproofing, drainage area for the prevention of flooding. The list goes on. Let's see, I'm jumping down a little bit to the middle, or by reason of obsolete, inappropriate, or otherwise faulty cladding or subdivision, deterioration of site improvements or facilities, division of area by rights of way. It really covers a full gamut of things that could be wrong with the property. And then, or a predominantly open area which by reason of any condition or a combination of conditions which are not being remedied would be detrimental. I'm going to go on to this before I suggest where we could find the answers. A lot of this is kind of call and response. This is like look and find. So we're looking for the finding and we're trying to find the facts that support it. Decadent area is an area which is detrimental to the safety, health, morals, welfare, or sound growth of a community because of the existence of buildings which are out of repair, physically deteriorated, unfit for human habitation, or obsolete, in need of major maintenance or repair, or if the real estate has been taken for non-taxes because the buildings have been torn down and not replaced, because of inadequate light, air, open space, or because of excessive land coverage, diversity of ownership, irregular lot size, obsolete street patterns, and the like. And I think substandard is the last one I'll read. It's relevant to the findings. So substandard area is an area wherein dwellings predominate, which by reason of dilapidation, overcrowding, faulty arrangement of design, lack of ventilation, light, sound, sanitary conditions, or the combination of these factors are detrimental to the safety, health, and morals of the sound growth of the community. So my understanding is that we need to make finding at least under one of these. So the language is that the proposed project is qualified under the statutory definition of blighted open, decadent, or substandard.
Can it be all three?
I guess it could be all three. What I did see in reading the third one of substandard was it did seem to suggest housing that existed on site as being dilapidated. So that would be potentially the one thing that the site does not have housing.
Well, the first one also references open area, which isn't primarily what this is, but I'm curious if maybe Jane has an opinion on which of these applies, in her opinion, for the applicant.
I think that honestly, all three could apply. I know what I've seen in findings that I've been involved with previously, they just list off blighted, open, decadent, or substandard in their finding, and then produce reasons as to why it fits within that general definition.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I mean, I think decadent probably the closest, but I can see all three being close.
Mr. Jarvis.
Yep.
I concur, Chris. I think decadent, but I noticed that language at the end of each one of them, detrimental to safety, health, morals, welfare, and sound growth of the community. I think we all know the stories of kids going in there and having parties and lighting fires, and the fact that these were open and wildlife was in them. While decadent applies, I think, with the exceptions that you noted, Jesse, we can find and are aware of individually as residents here in this community of evidence, certainly that they apply to all three. And I agree that we should go for all three, I think, and just label it sort of as it's written, and then just sort of because it was physically open to the elements. It was dangerous. We had members of the community going in there. No developer wanted this for a long time. I think points like that are points that maybe, Jeff, you can use for your thing. And I'm sure that, Mike, you can add to that.
Yeah, I think that makes sense, James.
So the next note here is review the 121A application, section 5, page 13. So I'm just going to open that real quick. And I think once I get this open, it'll stay open. Is that sharing section 5 statement of facts showing project area to be decadent?
No.
No. Okay. It's going to be really fun. Great. So, the application show that the project area has been in existence since the mid 1800s for the better part of the century. It's used as textile mills. The area sat abandoned since the late 1990s. So I think, to Mr. Zarvis's point, that's probably a point in time in which we would flag, since, at least in general terms, since the 1990s. And the verbiage here is left unintended for some time. The buildings are in decline and in need of redevelopment. I initially flagged that as probably not enough to substantiate the finding. But I think what the applicant does here is pursuant to the letter from the fire chief, and there's also a letter from the building inspector, which cite significant public safety concerns, including vandal, trespassing, and life-threatening fires. And so, I think I may have a tendency to go overkill here, but I think what I tried to outline is for the board to at least see the fire department letter. And this one is dated July 31st. The building department letter is dated August 2nd. And there's photographs of the existing building conditions. So this is on page 543 is where it starts. So if I can do this correctly, I'm just going to swing back to this document and go to page, believe it or not, saying page 543. So this is the first letter from, does everyone see this letter on the screen? Okay, so this is from our former fire chief Motter. There was a tour of the facility. The property has been a public safety concern for many years. There have been many fires in the various buildings over the years that have placed a tremendous strain on public safety resources throughout the area. And there's applaud for efforts to remove such a risk. And then it goes on to talk about 2 buildings that cause a great deal of concern due to their condition. The buildings are formally known as 1 and 15, pose a significant risk, not only to firefighters, but the public as well. From street, both buildings show major structural damage that could lead to catastrophic failure if they are left standing. Based on the location, feels that the collapse there would be a threat to public safety and people using the sidewalk and on Ferry Street. If, the chief at that point felt if they remain, they would be posing a threat. I have a question here for Mr. Michon, and just confirming that the numbers are correct here, building 1, and whether that was demolished in your first initial phase. Is that the building that was taken down?
It was.
Okay, and 15, do you know which building 15 is referring to?
Excuse me. I'm thinking that 15 is on the opposite side of the canal. It's the boiler room building, which is slated for demolition.
Okay. All right, and then very similarly is a letter from the building, our former building commissioner. It's very similar. It's a form letter, but so the important part here is for the board to have access to these photographs, which show the condition of these buildings. I'm not going to turn this one because the next image is the right way. But this is this building 1, Mike, the building that was taken down with the
It was. And just a quick little story there. So that side of the building, when I came in one day, is that the side? Yeah, that's the west side. So when we came in one day, that wall was on the ground. So, the building was literally collapsing. And that's what ended up happening, regarding, when I talked just quickly about the historic tax credits. We felt we had to take that building down because we couldn't have construction workers or engineers or architects, walking around that building because we were afraid it was going to fall on somebody. So that building was demolished, and obviously we saved the Belvedere for the city and we have it on the ground, and that'll be relocated on the site as part of our landscape.
And the rest of these appear to be continuing to show, those were images of building 1, and then this shows building 3. If the numbers are correct, this is from the...
That should be building 15, I believe.
Okay. So that's on the far side of the canal in your later phase of your project, but that's the building that is also slated for demolition.
Correct.
Okay.
That's where 2 pad sites are eventually going to go.
Great. I'm relying heavily on technology, and I'm seeing a white screen, so I'm going to bail out of this for a second. I wanted to show, this is from Exhibit M from the packet. There was a brief discussion of a no-build alternative, and it's on page 499. And I want to pull that up briefly. So did this share a screen of full text?
Yes.
Okay. In the middle of the screen, there's this paragraph for no build alternative. It's underlined. So I think this is important just to understand what would happen if the project was not happening and moving forward. So it's part of the environmental notification form that was submitted. So no build alternative was examined and would result in the continued vacancy of the site and buildings, which are potentially hazardous to their condition. Pursuit of this alternative would result in no improvement to stormwater quality, no improvement in existing building conditions, unrealized tax revenue to the city, and unrealized opportunities for the owners and residents of the subject and surrounding communities. So I think going back to this document here, the only other question that I had for the board was, in looking at these findings and these definitions, whether there was anything about the greater site, the view of the site from either the rail trail or Ferry Street or Lovefield Street that would contribute to this. I mean, I think the observation for most of us here is that it's a very prominent location. And so I think my question was, with that information so far, is that enough, or is there a need to broaden sort of what you see from the street in any way?
Any members feel like they would need additional information for that finding? Or James, do you have a question?
No, I just wanted to say that I feel that that those images and this discussion, and the lack of anyone standing up on this board who, and we've all been here a long time in Easthampton, saying any different, prove that this is a decadent, at the very least, if not all the other building. I mean, I think that's what I would consider substantive evidence. I know that in the mayor's letter it said we need more than just our findings, but I think that's a pretty solid finding, Jeff. I think that, is there anyone here that disagrees with that?
Okay, that's helpful. And I think the goal is, with that understanding, to put some additional text in a paragraph together that would describe that as a finding, and it will come back to the board for your review and editing and review before it's official. All right, so that's helpful. And the next required finding is that the project is not in contravention of any zoning, subdivision, health, or building ordinance, or bylaw, or rules, or regulations of the city or town. So again, what I'm trying to do here is help provide the information that we know exists and kind of make this a little more directed. The planning board issued a special permit for the project in its totality, and it was filed with the clerk in January 8th, 2019. And it's important because I think our understanding is that it complies with zoning based on the issuance of the special permit and the review that the board did at that time. I apologize. I think I hit that too soon. this screen sharing, I will say, is very tricky. It's on page 660. Great. So I think most of the board members were members at this time, but it covers the full scale of the project was described into, this is the paragraph under public hearing here, 2 large sections, one area of development occurring on the west side of the canal and the other occurring on the east side. Ultimately, the special permit was granted based on the plans submitted, which were in line with the plans that were presented for the Mass Works grant. And I'm just going to check the conditions that were crafted to give the framework. You know, there's a series of findings here where the traffic concerns were met, the parking requirements were met, you know, things like the sewage and trash and waste and connection to city services this was all covered through the issuance of this special permit. You know, I think the board granted this with conditions, and I'm looking at B, which is, you know, it was intended to give the developer flexibility to go up to a maximum of 152 units and down to, I guess, would that be 50% to allow for the fluctuation over the years in the market. And I think that's generally been understood to be the case. So I think that's important in terms of finding that it met all the zoning requirements at the time and still complies. And then the other, I think, factual piece here is that the planning board and ultimately city council approved a zoning amendment to further support this and other projects in the Mill District by allowing 0 lot lines in the Mill District. So the process was to remove setback requirements for buildings and allow parcels to be created around buildings. So that further supports the sort of the development pattern of this property. I don't know where my screen share is, if this opens up to a new document with the address to city council. Is everyone seeing that or no?
Nope, still looking at your document.
So the document that I was searching for, I couldn't find, but there was a document in here to explain the purpose for this. This is a bunch of maps. I mean, I'm going to scroll to a specific place so that it could hopefully be used as a finding. But this is a letter that came from Mr. Michon as part of the packet that requested this. And, you know, there was a purpose for this amendment, which was to, as it said here, to de-risk the project for investors related to opportunity zone tax benefits by segregating individual buildings onto their own independent parcels. So that was something that was specifically done in the Mill District, and it further supports the project and it allows the buildings to become their own parcels. So for the future development, it is in compliance with the zoning in small part because we changed some of it.
And we've already approved it. I mean, that already kind of shows that it's in compliance.
Correct. Great. All right. Are there any questions on that element? I mean, are there any other health or building code requirements that anyone thinks are necessary to mention? I mean, I think the expectation is that the buildings are all going to be renovated to building code, meet health code, and then we're showing that the subdivision of land is acceptable, and then the zoning is what allowed the special permit.
Any more planning board members have any concerns or questions about that section?
No, straightforward.
Okay.
Great.
The third finding is that the project does not conflict with the city's master plan, or if there is no master plan, with local or regional plan as appropriate. what I also wanted to point out is there's some discussion of the master plan in the 121A application. There's some text which we show, part of the Mass Works application is the public infrastructure around this project. And there was a lot of discussion that it all meets the goals of the master plan, which is to enhance the area. And I'll touch on that. And then, a lot of this planning effort dates back to 2002. And there's a really excellent document, which I would like to open, at least show people that the vision has been in place for decades. I think with some clear pointing of these facts, I think it meets this, but the board definitely needs to concur. I think I saw Member Zarvis with his hand up.
Sorry, I don't want to jump the gun here, but I think this is going to be the easiest one to prove, Jeff, because as you're already starting to point out, the 2008 master plan was work from beforehand. There are 95 references to the word mill in that entire document. It's in every single one of the 15 chapters except for chapter 13 on education. And on chapter 1, the very first one, it begins with our vision, which describes the city as retaining its mill town soul. Throughout this document, revitalizing our mills from blight is paramount. I think that it's going to be impossible to take a view that says that in any way this is against the master plan. This has got to be the easiest one to check off.
I agree. Simple, straightforward.
Well put, James.
Great. Because I want to be thorough. I would like, if the board will allow, I'm going to show the references. It's on page 12 and 13. So, I think as Mr. Zarvis mentioned, but here, there's references that talk about the most visible signs of the city's renaissance are the reclaimed mill buildings that are now home to small businesses, artists and studios and galleries, restaurants, social service agencies, and residences. For Easthampton, finding ways to retrofit, rehabilitate, and reuse its old mills for community building ventures is key component of the sustainable future. Some of the goals are revitalization of the downtown and sustaining the current momentum of adaptive reuse of buildings. Developing and maintaining adequate affordable housing stock means attracting and retaining a diverse workforce, permitting flexible use and mixed use spaces, targeting the creative arts businesses, nonprofits. So this was some of the supporting language in the applicant's application to DHCD, and I think it's important. It was important to just capture that. There was one other element that I wanted to mention, and I don't think I properly called it out, but in the master plan, there is a specific goal as well to support and provide financial incentives. And, this, in part of our discussion here, this is one of the first TIF-like projects that Easthampton has seen. But I don't want to belabor it, but I will put it into the finding to show that there is a goal identified in the master plan that we should be considering these. I think the idea would be that they're used carefully, but I did want to add that because it's not listed here. And then if people are not familiar with the urban rivers plan, I'm going to try to open that briefly. So this is it's a fold out pamphlet that folds out into a large map. This document was a charrette conducted in 2002, which brought together a variety of people. These people were in Eastworks. They gathered around to come up with a vision for the entire mill district. And this page kind of shows the structure of these meetings, which if you're a planner, you love charrettes, and a way to gather people and get ideas. But I think the most important part is that over the years, the Mill District has evolved really well in line with this plan, and many of the projects, and I'm sure our two former city planners, Stuart Beckley and Jess Allen, looked at this plan, and I think it's been a good guide for the city and developers to look at and understand where we want to be. And so the key components what I want to highlight briefly is, and so that they can be pulled out into these findings, is that this first part up here at the top, create a park gateway at Ferry Street. So create an eastern gateway to the park that welcomes people to downtown and Lower Mill Park. It could include an information kiosk, wayfinding signage, a trail map, streetscape and traffic calming improvements at Ferry Street crossing, potentially including a traffic light. So let's say in 2002, they weren't thinking about roundabouts at that point. Dedicate parking for bike trail users and other visitors. Provide dedicated parking lots in awaiting redevelopment. So there's a lot of our Mass Works project was hinging on complying with this plan and supporting it. Then scrolling down here, promote the reuse of the Ferry Street Mill complex. So restore and reuse the historic Ferry Street Mill complex, taking full advantage of the frontage on Lower Mill Park. Remove unviable or less significant buildings as necessary for space for parking and landscape improvements, and concentrate industrial uses at the rear of the mills while preserving the front section for clean uses that benefit directly from water views. So, there is so much that the private developer has done to be in compliance with this plan. And I see Mr. Michon had his hand raised, so I'll take a pause here.
Yeah, so thanks, Jeff. So I'm just going to quickly, in 2009, when I started to look at projects between Springfield, Easthampton, there's a handful of other areas as a developer moving back to Western Mass, originally being from Western Mass. This is one thing that when I did my demographics and I did my due diligence, and I met with Stuart, this is the plan that ultimately helped me envision what I could do with Mill 180 on Pleasant Street. At the same time, I had my eye on Ferry Street. So this because the city spent whatever they spent and the resources that they put together as a developer, this is why it really kind of happened, because because of this plan. And you can see it happening, if we can continue with this, which I'm, 99% sure we're going to, the next part of this with Ferry Street is also, just resurrecting the waterfront and the pond and, between all the mills there as well. So we can really create something that, the city and, all of us will be proud of. So just an FYI.
Thanks, Mike.
That's helpful. I had not heard that part of the story. Then just the create an Esplanade is below that. And so that's where, in my role here, working with the developer and working with the mayor and looking at Mass Works, this project was really very easy to support, but to also show that the Esplanade, so the multi-use path along Lower Mill Pond supports public access, but it also enhances the private development property. So it's definitely a public-private partnership. So the access to Lower Mill Pond comes up again a little bit later as a potential public benefit. All right, this is, I want to ask Mr. Chair, is this going okay? Is this too much talking? Is this the right amount? Or board members? I don't want to belabor it too much. I just want to make sure that we're covering things well.
I think this is good, Jeff. I keep plugging along. And just so people know that are listening, I've been asking planning board members if they have comments, but at the conclusion of this presentation or as we walk through this, I'll ask the public if they have any thoughts or feedback as well. So don't feel like you're getting skipped.
Okay, thank you. All right, so the finding number 4 is broken down into 2 parts. It's an A and a B. A is if the project, it has to be not detrimental to the best interest of the public or the city. So the suggestion here is we want to review and go back to the finding for blighted, decadent, and consider whether the overall redevelopment of the site is in the best interest of the public or city. So that I'll ask that question. And then As another example, there's a section of the application, and it's page 500, which talks about the improvements, to stormwater in particular, as one of the things that, without the development, so that no build scenario, the site, when it rains, the water is running off and it's going into the canal and into the Manhattan River. And so the perception and the proposed finding would be that by upgrading the property and properly dealing with stormwater, it is a public benefit to everybody. So I guess that's my question to the board is, in terms of the best interests of the city, I guess I'm just looking to have an understanding that you would agree that removing the blight or the decadent condition does have some benefit to the whole city. And so
all right, Jim, we found something that was easier than yours, but it's
You're right.
a low bar.
Okay, so that's a yes on that question I hear. And again, to be repetitive, you will see the finding before it's written. So page 500. I'm getting jammed up here. Is this, let's see. Or is everybody seeing a page with text?
Yeah,
Okay,
681 page
Okay.
PDF.
Yep, thank you. All right, so what I thought was pretty relevant here is the italics at the top is describe the project's stormwater impacts and measures that the project will take to comply with the standards of DEP stormwater management. So currently nearly the entirety of the site is covered by buildings, paved access areas, and concrete slabs. Some of the former mill buildings have already been demolished and debris piles are scattered across the site. With regard to existing stormwater management system, records show that drain lines exiting the site to the north and discharging into the Manhattan beyond the rail trail. It says that there's no outlet to be found. A number of on-site catch basins drain manholes and underground drains, as well as roof downspouts directly into the canal. And due to the lack of maintenance and amount of debris, it's uncertain that the existing stormwater management system is functional. So the proposed improvements will result in the 3 renovated buildings, associated parking, and new utility installation. The stormwater management system will utilize catch basins, inlets, underground infrastructure to capture and convey stormwater runoff. That's just runoff to a. I was wondering if this was a typo. I was struggling with this word, runoff to a propriety or proper sedimentation-based device to provide required water quality treatment prior to discharge. So I think this is a general finding that would support that the improvement to the site has a benefit to the entire city. Great. B is the project is not detrimental to the best interest of the public safety and convenience. So my note here to the group is to review and discuss the following MassWorks public infrastructure project elements, which, taken in quick reading, they really seek to improve vehicular movements due to the roundabout. There's enhanced pedestrian access to Lower Mill Pond via the multi-use path. There's improved pedestrian safety with the upgraded crossing for the Manhattan Rail Trail. And then there's the installation of rectangular rapid flashing beacons, which are the flashing lights, additional upgraded crosswalks, and a new PBTA bus shelter. So I guess, again, I'm just looking for the board to agree that those are important elements that support the best interest of the safety of residents.
I think they are, but I think you probably also put some stuff about the note from the fire chief there too. The fact that it's no longer a fire hazard is also in the interest of public safety.
Yeah, that, Jeff, I can't remember how much of this board was there for the permit on this in 2018, but the testimony and letter from Chief Motter was pretty compelling that night about sort of the risks. And I mean, I think even testified that he wasn't real comfortable with a site visit and wasn't even very excited to have to be there with his guys on the walkthrough, that the whole thing really felt pretty treacherous. And so I think that made a pretty big impression. I would definitely use that.
I will do that, and I'll refer mainly to the letter, and then I'll look through that decision to see if there was any note within the planning board's decision about that. Thank you. All right, moving on. So 5 is a general finding that the project is consistent with the most suitable development of the city. So I think generally speaking, there is a pretty clear pattern of development in the Mill District. And if all the board is not aware, but basically the planning board has been issuing either some of the terminology is blanket special permits or flexible special permits, which are granted to the property owner one time and kind of captures the overall uses that might occur and doesn't require continuous permitting of changes in tenants and changes to the site. And I would understand that has been a pretty big benefit to the owners of these properties, so that they are less burdened by having to come back over and over as like a tenant changes. So I guess this is a note for the Urban Rivers Plan. So I think the finding would note that, this project is directly in line with that clear vision that was laid out in 2002. So are there any other things here that anyone would feel would be important to list as consistent with other development?
I mean, if we're really looking for stuff, I do think you could go back to the master plan, right, which has a lot of stuff about redeveloping the mills. There might be some more material in there that's worth pulling out.
I can definitely agree with the use of mixed use. I think that's good. And I think it's not just, residential and businesses and creating these communities, but also I think that's a really good thing. All the mills I've seen and all the owners, they really are all looking to create a community, which is part of that mixed use pattern, and have their own community in their buildings and a larger Easthampton community for each of the buildings. And I very much see this project following in exactly the same suit. Each one is proud to be part of that community. And by one, I mean resident of the building or someone who's using the businesses there. So I definitely think that they're consistent in their building and maintaining and improving the Easthampton community.
Yeah,
well,
I agree.
Also, Jeff, because they're all sort of on the bike path, or this string of them is, I think, I can't remember if it's in the master plan or elsewhere, we've been talking about sort of the walkability of the city. And I think it's just a further draw to have people walk that way down the bike path. And now it might be to go see a dentist or go get lunch or go visit a friend. But, I think all of those are goals that we've stated for years as something we're all working towards. So I think it complements that as well.
Yeah, and it complements the idea that we are trying to preserve our historic structures in the city, and we are trying to find a good mix of residential and small businesses to coincide, to coexist. So it hits all of those points.
Great point, Chris. And frankly, Jeff, we're not there yet tonight, but the housing plan that we're talking about, this does increase more housing in the city.
Yep, that's good. And I did send out a draft of this both to the planning board and to the applicant. And so I did add something, Mr. Michon, that I wanted to ask if you could help us just put to pinpoint a little bit, which is this last item under this, consider the importance of workforce housing units as a potential public benefit. And so there's section 6A of the application and the agreement that state that some number of units are going to be workforce housing. And I'm just wondering if you can help us provide some information that would be logical to put here as supporting the public use and benefit.
I think you had it. You kind of had it there, Jeff. Regarding workforce housing. Workforce housing is a program that's it's not low income housing. It's like the next step up, and for the middle income individual that doesn't, they can't get low income housing, and they can't afford higher rentals. So this program facilitates that.
Mike, how is that defined? Or Jane, maybe you can help. Like, what constitutes workforce housing? Is it based on the annual income, or is it just is there some subsidy involved? What's the program for that?
Unfortunately, there is not. There used to be subsidy. There is not subsidy now. It's
Right, and
it's all,
I'm sorry.
It's all loans. So you get involved with mass housing, and they go by the AMI. And there's a sliding scale of, percentages that you would have to fulfill, or that I would have to fulfill. And a couple of them are actually on the lower side of the AMI. They're like in the 60 percentile. And then they go to the 80 percentile, and then they go to the 100 percentile of the depending on how many units you're going to have. So you have to fulfill a certain percentage of each for mass housing to be involved.
Right, and when you're looking at like those different percentages of AMI, so you look at the AMI for the city of Easthampton specifically. So when you're looking at, that 60, 80% range for workforce housing of AMI, you're probably looking somewhere in the range of, $50,000 to $60,000 a year. So it's not, again, like Mike said, it's not low income housing, it's just workforce. So you're looking at, teachers, different people in the public sector, a variety of people and residents that would be able to be would be able to afford a residence that they couldn't necessarily afford previously for whatever reason, because of, market values, which obviously are crazy in the Northeast in general and are just going up. So
the other thing that it affects too, which is, was part of a plan that I originally wanted to do here, was like an over 55, which would be, there's a lot of people that are retired on fixed incomes, and, this also facilitates them as well.
So this doesn't have an age restriction planned, but you're saying that basically by the workforce housing income numbers, that probably brings in a lot of people that are on a fixed income that might have qualified anyway?
Correct.
Understood. Thank you. Very helpful.
That was helpful. Thank you. So the last part I just want to touch upon under defining whether the project constitutes a public use and benefit. In July of 2018, the City Council approved a district improvement financing area around Ferry Street. It is also the city's first DIF. And I'm just going to pull it up here if this works, not to belabor the point, but to show that I'm going to open this and then share my screen again so it opens up. So this was something that was done in coordination with Mr. Michon and his team to create this district, this geographic area around Ferry Street, where the current assessed values are very low. And by establishing the district at that time, increased tax revenue can be used for public infrastructure. And so it's a way to create funding that otherwise would go just to the general fund directly. So the geographic area was defined around Ferry Street and in its periphery. And one of the key projects that was discussed, and I think is understood to be part of a later phase of this project, is some additional infrastructure for the project, but also a bike path connection from Ferry Street to the Manhattan Rail Trail. So this is a process that I guess this is the map which shows the geographic area. It covers Ferry Street and the rail trail, and then obviously it surrounds the property as one Ferry Street. What I was going to ask is, I saw the applicant's team here, Jeff Daly, just for a question about how, if you could try to explain how the diff correlates with this 121A package, because I think ultimately, the diff will come up in later discussions with the full city council. And so is Jeff Daly on the call? Would you be able to give just a summary of how the diff relates to what we're talking about here in terms of the 121A?
Sure. So not to get too much into the financial details, but the diff will be paid from excess tax receipts that the town receives from the project, that the city receives. And how it's going to work is the 121A portion of the taxes that gets paid to the state and then reimbursed to the city will get paid that way. And then there's a payment called the 6A, which is a portion of the 121A program that gets paid directly to the city. And the city then therefore takes the funds as they're accumulated of new tax revenues to pay the debt service on any diff that is out there. So we're talking about doing potentially a $1.3 million diff to finish the public infrastructure improvements. And like Jeff said, it was with the bike path and some other, I guess it's eastern side of the property projects, there would be additional public funds needed. So that the city would bond for those funds, and Mike's project would create excess brand new tax revenues, and that excess revenues would be paid to pay the debt service back. So folks from other parts of the city aren't paying that in the general fund. It's really dedicated to that project. And once the debt is paid down, which will be rather quickly, we think, because of the funding percentage and everything, it would be, that goes back directly into the general fund. So once the debt service on the $1.3 million for public infrastructure improvements gets paid, it goes back directly to the general fund.
And thank you. I think that's helpful. And I think the important part is that as this discussion goes, especially to the finance subcommittee and back to full city council, that the diff numbers and the 121 and the 6A payments are looked at together. So the full picture of that is assessed moving forward.
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Chair, I mean, are there any questions on that element or those pieces that contribute to the public interest?
Any members on that one? Okay.
Okay. So
Not applicable.
Yes, that's nice. And it happens to be the last required finding. So, I think in other cases, existing residential units could be considered within a project like this. And if they were, then they would have to be relocated. And that's not applicable to this project. So I appreciate kind of everyone taking the time to walk through that. Are there, Jesse, I don't know are there questions or anything that we
Yeah, so planning board members, any of you have any comments or questions? All right, so I guess I'd open it up to the public now. If anybody has any comments, questions about any of those specific thresholds or any other aspects of the project, I'd be happy to hear comments or questions. Again, you can either raise your virtual hand on Zoom or turn on your camera and indicate, or *6 on your phone. Or if you need to, you can just unmute yourself and ask to address. I'm not seeing anybody, so I guess that's it. Jim, yes.
So about process here, I know we have 45 days, and you indicated, Jeff, that you wanted to take this meeting, the information that you gathered from this discussion, put together a draft, have another meeting where we approve it, and then ship it off to the city council. Is that about right?
Yep, that's about right. And I don't have the paperwork in front of me, but I think approximately the 45 days was maybe around December 14th or December 15th. And then city council is set to reconvene on December 16th to at least receive the report. So I think the target that I have set generally is to get materials to city council. It's the Thursday before. So my my deadline to work with the board and produce a report and submit it, sorry, I just lost my calendar, is December 10th. And so what we would want to talk about right now is having one more meeting of the board to review a draft of the written findings and make sure that there's any changes or edits. And then I would expect.
How long will you need to do it?
Given everything else that's going on, I need a little bit of time. The board is incredibly busy, and so I'm really respectful of that. As of right now, there is a meeting. The board has a meeting set for December 1st, which is an ongoing project. The Duncan proposal. I think it's feasible for me to deduce this to writing and provide it at that night. You could take the applicants. You could take the project first, the applicant's project first, and then if it's all written and it's a matter of reviewing it, I wouldn't expect it to take a lot of time. So maybe with that, maybe December 1st is another time when we could pick this up.
That makes perfect sense. Can you handle that in 2 weeks, Jeff? I mean, because there's also Thanksgiving in the middle and all that stuff. I want to make sure you're not putting more on your plate than you can handle. That's not a Thanksgiving joke. But we do have another week after that if you wanted to take another week and do it on the 8th. But that might cut it a little close.
I think what I would like to try to do is set December 1st for the target and assess, this is not technically a public hearing. It's just a meeting, a working meeting of the board. So I could try to be in communication if I don't think I can meet the December 1st. And, I'm trying to figure out, we have a new planner who's helping the board with other projects. And if there is a Tuesday that the board could not convene, I'm trying to make sure that you have a Tuesday that you're not going to convene. So I'm going to shoot for the 1st.
All right.
How am I working?
We certainly appreciate that. Before we move this officially, anybody from the applicant, you guys either have anything to add or any issues with the December 1st date?
No, that's fine. And thank you so much for taking the time to go through everything. Jeff, you did a wonderful job. Planning board, thank you so much for being here and taking the time.
Sure. All right. So Jeff, we just need a motion to continue to the 1st.
And
sure. Yep.
I'll make the motion. I just wanted to double check. It's the 1st at 6:30. We're stuffing it into the second part of the 1st at 6:30, right?
Now that was a Thanksgiving joke, Jim. I heard that.
Okay. I motion to continue the discussion of One Industrial Ops LLC seeking approval of project under Chapter 121A to December 1st at 6:30.
Chris, did you second? I saw your mouth move, but I didn't hear you.
Oh, sorry. My thing's right back here. I second that.
All right. So motion to continue to December 1st. Mr. Zarvis.
Aye.
Brenda.
Aye.
Harry.
Aye.
Austin.
Aye.
Chris.
Aye.
And I am an aye. So we will see you all on the 1st. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a
Thank
good day.
you.
All right. So moving right along, the next item on our agenda is kind of an interesting one. It's Cannabis Bylaw in the Highway Business District Advisory Review of Changes Proposed by City Council. So I think we were all on the City Council meeting waiting to talk about the 121A when this came up last time. Technically, I think the process under the charter is we voted on the last version and it goes back to City Council and they're free to amend it or do whatever they want with it. And they seem to have wanted it to come back to us with their amendments to see what we thought. So I don't know that we really need to vote to approve or we can't really reject or what have you, but I guess maybe Jeff, if you want to walk through the changes, maybe we could at least decide if there's something to flag. I'm not sure. Jim?
Process, if we did have any comments, would it be you, the chair, or Jeff that would like draft a letter or just sort of indicate to them that we had comments? What would we do if we did have a comment?
I mean, this is sort of uncharted territory here. So I think we could be formal and vote on, Jeff raising issues with City Council or something. Or we could simply state, we can talk through these changes right now and Jeff can share his own reflections based on what we've said. I don't think we need a formal vote on this, but I'm happy to vote, good.
I'd recommend that if we have a comment or something that the board agrees upon, that we could just put it in a letter and send it to them. Because I think this is, just like you said, informal, and it's just, here's our opinion, if any.
Yeah, I did not get a chance to look through the proposed revisions, so I think it'd be helpful if Jeff walks us through those, then we can give some feedback and see where we land once we've done that.
Yeah, I think that all
makes sense to the rest of the board.
Yeah, and I think at the end of the review, I think as you all just said, I think if there's something that the board all agrees on or has like consensus that that's something that you would want to represent like as the planning board as a whole to relay information. I'm just trying to understand the process myself. I was there and this was kind of the request was what we should check, see what the planning board thinks about these.
Well, and if not,
we
even if we don't have unanimity on this, we can certainly share our thoughts right now in a recorded Zoom meeting that City Council can watch if they're so inclined. And I do intend to take some public comment, although again, it's not like we really have a vote on this, but at least we can open that up. So let's just march through what the revisions are and we can sort of share our thoughts, I guess.
Okay. I appreciate that. I mean, I would say by and large, some of this is not substantially different than what the planning board talked about. So the first couple sentences in red kind of stay the same. Any cannabis establishment shall be permitted provided the cannabis establishment is located in a building in existence as of a date. So we had always talked about existing building is one thing, new building is another. Where the word or is here, where it started to change based on the discussions, was that there's new buildings, and then there's also buildings that might exist today but go through an addition. So at the word or, if one is to be located in a new building or expanded or expanded after date. So the date presumably would be sometime when the city council is ready to vote. So let's say December or January. It shall comply with all of the planned business development requirements under section 8.1. So, right. So there's a couple exceptions and there's always been a list of exceptions. The first one is A, cultivation manufacturing uses must be accompanied by a retail establishment, which was discussed during the planning board process. Mm-hmm. This is probably one of the more substantial changes that is under consideration, and shall not be subject to the 200-foot separation of section 10.10 4.5. So you may recall that that section says it doesn't apply in the mill industrial districts, but in the highway business district in the downtown, there was a separation between two retail establishments from property line to property line of 200 feet. And so the discussion both at the subcommittee level and at the city council was that given that we're taking cultivation and combining it with retail, that fact, plus the fact that this is the highway business and you're arriving by car, and the buildings and properties are larger, the 200-foot separation was not as significant as it would be if you were downtown. And I know that there's differences of opinion on this, so I'm not trying to project my opinion. I'm just saying that the discussion was if you're walking downtown and you're continuously walking past a dispensary, it could be, that could be a negative impact. The discussion was that on the highway business district, the buildings and the properties are separate enough that it may not be warranted. So I think I'll continue on and then the board can discuss. The rest, actually, I'll try to just keep summarizing. So B, uses must be on a property a minimum of 3 acres. So this was a point of discussion early on. The planned business development criteria established 3 acres as a property size. And then through the kind of the ending process with the planning board and ordinance committee, the discussion was, well, let's increase the size to 5 acres. And I think there was a couple questions and some maps were presented. And if you use 5 acres, there are very few parcels that are available for this. And lowering it to 3 makes the opportunity more available to a wider range of properties. And so that was discussed and determined to be more equitable to make it available to more properties. C, cultivation manufacturing buildings must be at 100 feet from Route 10. This was the original number, and then there was some discussion and it went down to 75. And through the discussion at City Council, the distance was increased to 100 feet again. D is a newer one that came up through largely public input and some questions about how close could these buildings be to properties that are in a residential zoning district. So we're talking about the highway business district, but around the periphery of that, there are properties that are zoned residential. And so 150 feet for a property line to building was discussed as a buffer to separate these buildings from residential properties. And it is added in here that the first 50 feet must be vegetated because this is a building setback. There was discussion that driveways and parking areas could be right up on the property line. And so I think that was not desirable. So we want to, the discussion was 100 foot for buildings and then a 50-foot vegetated buffer where nothing would be happening. And all that was to begin to protect, the adjacent residential districts. E here, the discussion at the last city council meeting, and again, Jesse, and board, I'm sorry, if you were all here for these discussions, I apologize, but there was a question about whether there could be multiple buildings at 25,000 square feet. And the answer was yes. There was never a discussion to limit the number of buildings of that size. So this language is intended to say that the total footprint of cultivation and manufacturing buildings shall not exceed 25,000 square feet in size. So the intention is if you have a 25,000 square foot building, that's the limit would be one of those. If you had two 12,000 square foot buildings, you could do that because you're under this threshold of 25,000 square feet. F is about existing buildings that might undergo change in the future. The planning board may, in its discretion, waive any of the requirements of section 8.1 and or reduce the 3-acre lot size to 2.5 acres, except that the 25,000 square foot cap and the 100 feet from Route 10 and the 150 feet from the property line of abutting property owners remains in effect. So I think the concern was that it's a little bit of the square peg in a round hole. If with you apply 8.1 standards, there could be some that may not be able to be met by existing sites. And so this is really just intended to create a waiver for the planning board in the future. If an existing building comes in and there's something that doesn't work in 8.1, it's just to acknowledge that could be waived. And the idea is that if you're taking a green site and can develop it, you can design your property to meet the standards because you have a clean slate, whereas existing properties might have some constraints that we're not aware of. So then finally, and this came up, the city attorney, I would say that the city attorney reviewed this language and the city attorney found its contents to be acceptable and within the scope. And he did offer that it was reasonable to consider a decommissioning bond. And I think the key words for the planning board is to know that you may require. This is not an absolute requirement. And in my thinking about this, I did want to establish some size for which a smaller building would not really be subject to a decommissioning bond. We really don't do this for anything other than solar. The basis for this was very large buildings that would be hard to repurpose. Maybe they have a decommissioning bond to come down, but there's some size threshold, and at 5,000 square feet is a very common size building. It's not overly large or excessive or would be difficult to reuse. So it's just a benchmark, and it may or may not survive the rest of the amendment process. So the rest of what I would do in preparing for the next hearing is just kind of, what I'm trying to do is create some legislative intent to help explain kind of why these provisions are here, a little bit of what I'm doing now, just to kind of whatever's agreed upon to give the explanation. And so I didn't update this lower section yet because I was running out of time, but there's kind of just a summary of what's the purpose of these so that there's some reference in the future. So that's kind of a quick summary. I know that there's things to understand and question here.
Jim.
Thank you. Wow. Okay. So, Jeff, good job in summary. I know this has gone back and forth a lot, and there's a bunch of changes there. Some of them, whatever. For me, it's only about G. And I saw the word may, and I know that we have a tendency to use whatever tools are in our toolbox. And it might not be us in a planning board years down the road. It could be someone else. And if they see that in there, I'm sure that it'll lead them to think at some point someone thought it might be necessary to have a decommissioning bond, for which we only do it for solar and no other business. I definitely sat through discussions of what are we going to do with these buildings, as they're sort of described kind of in the way that, well, the building for Apical was at the end of the Easthampton boundary there, the old building, not the new one. You know, it's sort of the tin siding and the, you know, and there's a sort of this concept that are they really usable for something else? I've never really bought into this. I think there are other uses for them. I'm not sure why you would tear a building down. You'd find another use for it. I have a real big problem with this. I have a big problem applying it to marijuana. I think that it's a reactive, fear-based thing. I think that it's really disadvantageous to developers and places an undue burden on them. I love that the word may is in there, but I don't think it's enough. And so I strongly feel that G is it's an overreach.
Any other comments or questions from planning board members? Harry?
Yeah, I'd like to take up that distancing factor between the dispensaries. I'd like to know once and for all, does that 200 feet mean anything or doesn't it? I've talked to this to many people. I've never yet to get an answer. When we originally took up this marijuana issue about 4 or 5 years ago, INSA wanted a definite separation between dispensaries because of possible disease getting into their plant from another dispensary. I'd like to have that answer, that question answered once and for all. Does it or doesn't it?
Well, right now there's a 200-foot buffer between dispensaries. So what this is proposing, changing that. And I think, at least my recollection from when we had the conversation, was to sort of avoid like a cannabis district kind of concept. Admittedly, we were sort of legislating in the dark, not having seen how it all rolled out. I can still sort of personally see that argument if we're talking about Cottage Street or Main Street or something, but I do think that the highway business is a little different in that sense. So I'm not, opposed to getting rid of it in that context personally, but I mean, it is there right now. There's a 200-foot buffer outside of, I believe, just the mill industrial zone. So anywhere else, if you have a dispensary open, you couldn't have another within 200 feet.
And I would just ask a question, Harry, just to, I guess, clarify, when you were saying that, you mentioned like contamination or disease, right? So it is just a point of clarification that this is about dispensaries and not cultivation. I think maybe it was what you alluded to is early on, there was cultivators who were concerned with another cultivator being too close and cross-contaminating and that kind of stuff. So I just wanted to make sure if I understood your question correctly, the reason, like what's the purpose of the separation? And for this one, it's more along the lines of what Jesse said in terms of having a series of dispensaries all in a row. That was the original intent of creating the separation, is to break that up.
Cultivation. I don't care if they put one 10 feet from the other. I could care less. I just want to have somebody's have a cultivating business, and then somebody start another one less than 200 feet away, and then have something happen. That's all. I don't care if they put them on 10 feet apart. I could care less. If it's just cultivation, it should be. If it's dispensaries and cultivation are two different things.
Right. Yeah, because as of right now, there's no separation required for cultivation. And I do recall there was a discussion, there was a hemp cultivator who was looking at locating in a mill building not too far from where INSA is cultivating. And I think that was raising red flags because of the gender of the plant. So hemp being the male plant and cannabis being the female plant, like that was a concern. but it wasn't just two regular cannabis establishments. I've never heard that be an issue, so there's no separation requirement for that. So, okay.
Any other comments or questions from planning board members? Any comments or questions from the public? You can raise a virtual hand or turn on your camera and raise your actual hand, or *6 on your phone, or I see Sam Nelson. If you just remember to state your name and address for the record, please.
Sam Nelson, 25 Highland Ave. I'm just wondering why this has been, I don't even know if it's been approved or not. I know I'm late to the game, but I wasn't able to be at the previous meetings. The people on the Route 10 corridor fought tooth and nail to keep Stop and Shop out of that location due to the negative impact of the traffic flow. And then there was talk about how when the post office went in, it negatively affected the water table, and people on our street were dealing with water in their basement that had never had water in their basement before. And adding facilities of these size is definitely going to shift the water table again, not to mention the negative impact it's going to have on the Manhan watershed, because the Manhan River is directly behind that property. And at this point, it's getting a little out of hand with the size of the marijuana businesses and the amount of them, especially in location to my street. At this point, if this goes through, I'll literally be surrounded by marijuana industries. I have one at the top of the street on Route 10, and they're talking about that one there. And then we have INSA through the woods. It's, during the summer months, especially when the wind shifts to the coming out of the southeast, we can smell INSA on our street. You ask any of the neighbors in the neighborhood, they'll tell you they can smell it. And it's not, that detrimental to our living, but it's something that we didn't anticipate when we purchased these homes. I actually purchased the home that I grew up in about 5 years ago. We moved back here from Springfield just for the better school systems and, a little bit quieter of a town, obviously. But it's just, at this point, I just don't understand why we have to have such a large facility that's going to, what sounds like, on both sides of the street. And the negative impact on that stretch of the Route 10 corridor is going to be tremendous, especially for all of us that live here. I'm sorry, I don't see the positive impact for any of us that own properties anywhere near that location.
So, Mr. Nelson, thanks for your comment. So just to answer a couple of your questions. So first of all, the way we got here, at least for the planning board, is that the city council made a proposal to amend the bylaws, the zoning bylaws, which under the charter comes to us. We had a hearing where we took feedback and talked with the ordinance subcommittee, and then it went back to the city council. They've asked us to look at these new revisions they made and give them some feedback, although it's ultimately city council that decides on the final bylaws. So that's sort of what's before us. I know there's been a lot of talk about different projects that are being proposed in the area. This isn't specific to a project. It's a general change to the bylaw. So it may make a project easier or harder depending on what it is. And I think you're talking about that Tasty Top parcel with the driving range, but that specifically is not what we're addressing. We're looking at it generally. So it's kind of hard to ignore that fact, but at least as far as the bylaw we're looking at is, how would this impact the city, in the future, generally speaking? Jeff, did you have something to add?
I was just going to offer for Mr. Nelson that there has been a lot of discussion. There is some information available now online. I know that people complain about the website, it is hard to navigate, but there's a page for city council, and there's the zoning amendment as it was previously written with all the facts and information with it. That is available. And I just wanted to flag that this was a kind of a informal advisory review from the planning board at this stage. The next two meetings, which is what I wanted to just at least make sure that you're aware of, the subcommittee of the city council is meeting on, it's not the best meeting date ever, November 25th at 6:30. and they are going to continue to talk about the nature of the amendment, and then I don't know if it's the final public hearing, but an additional public hearing with City Council. And so for this matter, the City Council is the group who makes the final decision and may want to hear your input. Is December 16th at 6:15. So they are. It's shifted from the planning board to City Council, and the next time the full City Council will take it up is December 16th at 6:30.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you, Mr. Nelson. Next name I have is Danielle Martineau.
I have a few questions. The first one, Jeff, I think the public hearing, at least the last one that they mentioned when we were all meeting, is December 2nd.
Oh, okay.
Well, did it change?
No, it should. No, it did not change. So if you I'm going to check my notes. If you want to ask, I'm going to double check my notes. I apologize if I said the wrong date.
Jeff, can you check the city website actually and see what the official date is on there?
Yep.
On the agendas.
Yep.
Danielle, do you have something else to get to while he does that?
So I've been attending most of these meetings except for one. And I was looking over the wording that you were just going through, Jeff. And I'm wondering what happens with the 35-foot height cap, because that was something that you guys voted on, right? You voted to have a height cap. And I think it was 3 stories was the cap. And that just kind of disappeared. I don't know what happened. Did somebody change it, or did it just not get in there? But to me, that's really important, because we're just talking about 25,000 square feet for the footprint. We're not talking about the gross square footage. So obviously that is dependent on how many stories these buildings have. So I'm just wondering, so that was my first question.
So first of all, once it goes to City Council, they can revise and change any of this. So we sort of vote on what the original proposal is, and it doesn't usually come back to us even like this.
Yeah, no, I understand that. But I guess what I'm saying is I've been attending all these City Council meetings, and I haven't heard anyone talk about changing that. So I don't know what happened.
Danielle, I think that the height was contained in the plan business section, the 10.8.1. Is that right, Jeff? That's still, did that have a height cap in it?
There's 2 parts to that question. The highway business district in general has a 3-story maximum, right? So I heard Ms. Martineau say that. So that's just consistent. That's in the zoning already. And so that wasn't subject to change. The only thing that I will need to double check is this difference between the 30-foot height reference. In the highway business, the maximum height, it's kind of 2 thresholds. Maximum height is 45 feet, but the maximum number of stories is 3. So it's a play on measurements and how tall your ceilings are, but the maximum stories is 3, maximum height is 45. So my recollection was that there was no changes to those maximums, although it had come up in discussion, and I recall early discussions about lowering the maximum height to 2 stories. But ultimately that was not decided as a specific amendment to move forward. So Ms. Martineau, I will double check. I don't recall there being a specific change that would change that. I think 3 stories is the maximum, and it's just been consistent, and it's just in a different section. So I'll double check the 30-foot, but that wasn't to my knowledge, that wasn't added as an amendment.
Oh, okay. I mean, I can look at the recording too of the meeting, but I thought it was 35 feet because of the view shed issue. That was what I was remembering, but there are a lot of meetings that were happening. So,
Danielle, anything else?
No, that's all. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions from the public? Sure, Scott.
I had a question for Planner Bag. It's about the 150-foot buffer. Does that apply to existing buildings?
As written, yes, the 150-foot buffer is from an existing, it's from a building to a residential district. Understanding that, you have a property, a specific property that, to my knowledge, there's no residential districts abutting your property. And so that wouldn't really be applicable based on my knowledge of your property. Whereas other places, where the highway business district meets a residential zoning district, that's where that would cue the 150-foot setback.
Okay.
The 100-foot setback from Route 10 would be applicable, though. In case that wasn't clear, I just wanted. There's two setbacks there.
Wouldn't the 50-foot vegetative buffer also be an issue? Should he use the building that he's talking about in that other project to also do growing in there? Because you need 50 feet of vegetative buffer between that and the building, right?
The way it's intended to read is that the 150 feet and the 50 is connected to a residential zoning district.
Not a residence, just a residential zone, right, Jeff?
Correct.
There's
That's the intent, yeah.
There's a lot of residences in the highway business district, but aren't in a residential zone.
Got it.
That's sort of a distinction that's kind of crucial here.
Thank you. That the residential is for the vegetated buffer as well, not just the 150.
I read it as being for that whole section.
Okay.
It wasn't our language.
Well, actually, I want to. Do you mind? I'm still trying to figure out the date.
And I apologize. I interrupted you. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
So it's item F. Actually, no. Sorry. It's D and F. D was where it was originally created. D was the intent. So if there's a property that abuts a residential zoning district, then you're talking about 150 feet for buildings and a 50-foot vegetative buffer. So the intent was to include that in F. So it may be a language thing that needs to be adjusted slightly, but so because we're responding to a question for Mr. Chasm's specific property, there's no residential zoning district abutting it. So the intent would that the 150 feet and the 50-foot vegetative buffer is not required. That's the intent. It may need a comma or some other.
I think you should bring that note. That's a comment we should make back to the city council, is that they might want to flesh through that intent and maybe use that particular project as an example.
Yeah.
Scott, did you have more questions or comments?
Yeah, I did. I had a couple. And then about the 100-foot buffer from Route 10. Now, I don't think the Cernak facility reaches 100 foot. I think it's more or less 80 foot from Route 10. So does that affect us from cultivating in the future?
Well, this is all new building development, right? You're in an existing building, so none of this applies to you, I don't think, right?
Well, I just want to make sure.
Well, this is part of where this particular part of the amendment evolved, because I think there's been a variety of people attending, including Mr. Chasm, who wants to have the flexibility to build an addition in the future. And an addition of some size would be required to be 100 feet from Route 10, as would a new building of size adjacent, separated from Route 10. I don't know the exact measurement of your building. It's something that is measurable on GIS, at least informally, to get a sense, but I can't do that and talk at the same time.
Okay. So if I'm correct, it just applies to an expansion.
Yeah, as it's currently written, that's the proposal as I read it.
Okay.
Anything else?
Yeah, I just want to address what Mr. Nelson's concern was in regards to cultivation and the smell. I've been to multiple cannabis facilities, cultivators, and when you're outside, it's not supposed to have that cannabis scent. So I'm not sure about the ventilation that INSA is using, but the facilities that I've gone to does not have any smell or scent that travels outside. You can only smell it when you go inside. So it all depends on their ventilation system and how it's set up, basically, because it's supposed to be really clean. So basically what happens is that air from the inside actually gets trapped and reused in the cultivation facility in these rooms. I'm just trying to let him know a little bit about cultivating and how it actually works inside. So there's no air that gets pushed out. It's not supposed to. All the air is actually gets reused inside the facility. It gets brought in and reused. So everything gets trapped, even from dehumidifiers, all the water, everything that we reuse, it's actually gets put back into the system and gets put back into the grow rooms. So it's not supposed to smell unless you walk into the facility.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other comments or questions from the public or the planning board?
JP here.
Hey, JP, feel free to address the board.
Thank you so much. Jeff, I was wondering if you could put that back on the screen, the red.
Yes.
It'll help me focus on the sections. It had to do with the, let's see, E and, is it E and F? E and F. And has to do with the 25,000 square feet. It says in E that it's the footprint is not to exceed 25,000, and in F that the building is not to exceed 25,000, if I'm reading it correctly. And I guess the footprint would refer to the first floor level, the basic footprint, and the other would be the gross square footage. I would imagine. Can somebody clarify that for me?
I would agree that that is a little bit vague, JP, and I think you could certainly make the argument that you have just made.
Now that I've made that argument, just to kind of wonder about it, I would like to hear your input about whether we are limiting to the first floor or to the gross footage, and what your thoughts are for that.
Well, it's hard. It's hard for us to opine on sort of what the city council's language here means or what was intended. I think that when we talked about the 25,000 square foot limit in our draft, it was certainly with the idea that it would have 25,000 square feet of space within the building, I think. And that if you had a 24,500 square foot footprint, but it was 3 stories tall, I don't think that was what at least we sort of contemplated, but I don't know how detailed we got into that discussion. And I certainly don't know what the city council would be contemplating with this, but I would say, JP, that that is certainly something that's worth addressing with the city council before they vote on anything.
Yeah, and it's, this is a draft in response to the last public hearing, and because of the schedule of the planning board seeing this, the ordinance subcommittee will see this on November 25th, and then it'll go back to city council. And Ms. Martineau was correct. I did find my notes. The next hearing is December 2nd at 6:15. So I'm really sorry if I said the 16th. It's actually December 2nd. But based on the last discussion, and it's subject to review by the city council and further discussion and deliberation, but it was going to be 25,000 square foot footprint. And I think the discussion was understanding that if you're capping the footprint at 25,000, but you can do 3 stories, you're talking about a building that's gross square footage is larger, 3 times larger. So I think in F, it really just needs to add footprint to be in line with what was written in E. And for the purposes of moving forward, it's a discussion of footprint. As far as I've been, understanding and drafting this, it's footprint at this point.
I would also just provide an edit that on letter F, it says building may not exceed 25,000 and must be situated like 25,000 what? You got to put square feet in there, or it could not exceed 25,000 acres.
Understood.
Because you'd mentioned acres prior versus before that.
Right. Yep.
Good point. Are you sure about what you said earlier, Jeff, that you want to use footprint, defining 25,000 as the first floor and then 2 floors on top, which gets what, 75,000? Wouldn't it be better to just take the word footprint out and make it just square feet?
That's certainly always been what I understood us to be talking about, but I'm not sure that we got that explicit. So I would agree that there's some question there, but I would agree with Jim that I certainly wasn't contemplating 25,000 feet being multiplied by the number of floors.
Yeah, that's a really important distinction.
JP, were you done with questions or comments?
I really appreciate your giving that some thought. So thank you.
Thank you. And I saw, Brenda, I saw you raising your hand right before, if you still want to.
I'll just throw in some comments. Yeah, you all know, I don't like this ordinance. I don't support it. I don't think it's in Easthampton's best interest. I think it's unnecessary. I think the current ordinance is working great. What, there are only 6 retail licenses, is that correct? So with Cott's project, we're up to 5 already, and it's reusing and repurposing, buildings that were sitting vacant. Cook's is almost done from what I can see. They've done a lot of work outside. So I really don't think it's good for the city. But anyways, on G, it's no surprise, Jim, I'm on the other side of it. I would love to replace may with shall. I think may renders it useless depending on planning board composition, depending on who's on the planning board. May, let's not. And I mean, I think there are really good reasons. The city attorney recommended that. Other communities are doing that. I don't think it's fear-based in the sense that it's irrational fear in reaction to marijuana. I think it's justified concern about these huge buildings that are being built that are hard to repurpose. I mean, so I don't like the decrease of 5 to 3 acres. I don't understand the equity issue. There's only 6 retail licenses. If this is tied to retail, that's a huge disincentive for people to use the pre-existing buildings. We've had the fellow who wants to build on Tasty Top. He's already said it works better for him to build new. He's not going to be alone in that. So I don't think that's in Easthampton's best interest at all. So I think you've heard ad nauseum all of my other points, so I won't get into them, but I did just want to say that whatever goes to city council, it shouldn't say it's unanimous. Thanks.
Thank you, Brenda. Any other comments from the public or board members? Cott, sure. You're muted.
Okay, getting back to A, in regards to the 200-foot buffer for the retails that are in for a new development, I think if we're going to open it up in that kind of way, it should be across the board and just wipe the 200-foot buffer right on the highway business. So then it would allow for other cannabis retailers to go into other spaces that could possibly be unused in the future if there's a property or a building that becomes available. You just don't know. And that way it's not directed right for just a 5-acre parcel or a new planned business development.
All right. Thank you, Cott. So I tend to think, because of sort of the way, Jeff, that we've all kind of raised different issues and concerns, it might be easiest for you either just to report back based on things that were flagged, but not do anything formal as far as a vote or a letter. But I don't know how other board members feel.
I agree.
Does anybody disagree with that approach? Or Jeff, do you disagree with that approach?
No, I think with the discussion of the decommissioning bond. So I think I understand, and I think that's a fine thing to bring forward, is that, whether it should be may or should be shall. I think there's pros and cons to the 200-foot separation, and so I think a lot of this stuff is already been discussed and is part of the deliberation of City Council. So I appreciate it, and I think it's going to be deliberated on. The one thing that I wanted to just ask again was just clarity for the 25,000 square foot cap. So, Jesse, it sounded like something that you said is that in the early discussions, we started at 50,000 square feet, which is what is in our Article 6 for single retailers. And then we determined that was too big, kind of like that. So that might be too big for a single building, and brought it down to 25. So I just want to understand we can go to the whole board. I'm just trying to understand, so your vision was that was gross square footage all along, or?
That's certainly how I think James said it best. I sort of envisioned, we were talking about one building, one structure, one floor, and that was the limit on the square footage. Not that it was limited to one floor, but that I personally certainly wasn't imagining, like I said, a 25,000 square foot building that was 3 stories tall, 25,000 square foot footprint. That to me seemed like not what I was thinking of, but I don't know that we ever specified that or dealt with that. Jim, do you want to add?
I tend to agree, but I remember we had a conversation and it got brought up. Someone referenced to us that INSA, and you forgive me if I'm a little bit wrong with my numbers, but my memory says they originally came to us with about 90,000 square feet of grow, and then they augmented that, adding to it, and I think they're over that. Now, it might have been 60 and they added to 90. You'll forgive me. It's been a while since I came forward. But just to give it a sense of scale, these grows typically do use a good amount of room. Now, different grows are different. Sometimes they're hydroponic, they're working on layers, they rotate, and there's all different kinds of systems, some of them space safe. But in general, it takes a lot of space for a grow. A 25,000 square foot grow is not a big grow. It's a really tiny grow for this kind of thing. I definitely was thinking of a 1-story, 25,000 square foot structure when I sort of envisioned this. And the Miss Martineau, forgive me if I'm mispronouncing the name, brought up something that I also remember us discussing in terms of the height limits. And I know these things can have multiple stories. So I think I do recall that there was some discussion about it based on that comment that the grows actually used a lot more space. And a 25,000 square foot grow is not really who's going to want that? It's not. What can you do with that? It's not enough. So it's interesting to me, which way we go on that. I think footprint must have got put in there based on that discussion. Just a thought.
Okay.
I don't remember. I would just say personally, I don't have any doubt that there are cultivators that would love to have hundreds of thousands of square feet. I think the concern with the cap was what happens when they leave. And that part, the 25,000 is bigger than the new River Valley Co-op by a smidge. That's right. A big space for someone else to come into,
big.
My personal opinion. But so Jeff, I guess, I think there were a few sort of clerical or typographical or sort of drafting errors, and you're the one that's probably going to deal with all of that anyway. So telling you probably cuts out the middleman. And I think the rest is all these sort of policy questions that the city council will have to grapple with.
Yep. No, that's helpful. I did analysis of some cultivation facilities, and it's in the packet, and it was my analysis was based on the footprint. And so that's where I'm just trying to recalibrate what it means if we are talking about a gross square footage rather than a footprint. But I think regardless, the issue needs to be clarified at City Council, and I will make sure that there's emphasis to understand that if it's not gross, if it's just footprint, then it could result in a I mean, I don't know that 3 stories is really viable, but even 2 stories, it would increase the square footage overall. So I will make sure that there's a clear discussion of the difference between footprint and gross, and make sure that it's clear what is being decided upon. So I hear that, loud and clear.
I think that's the most important part, because I think Danielle's point, the real point here, is that we talked about this several times, and I don't know that we explicitly addressed that. So, pick a lane either way, but we should at least know that we're picking a lane, right? And make sure that that's clear for everyone in town. So,
because the scenario I could see is a 10,000 square foot building footprint, 2 stories, 3 stories, and it would have to be a smaller 3rd story, but you could do it, at that point, at 10,000 square foot footprint, you can do 3 stories and be at 30,000. So you have to drop some square footage off the top floor. All right. I think I just need to get some clarity on that. So that's helpful.
I do still see, I'm not sure it's the same hand raised, Danielle, or if you want to add something.
No, I just want to add something. It's kind of a side note, but it really shouldn't be. Something that has really been left out of these conversations is the amount of resources these cultivation centers require. And I just want to put that out there that as a resident and as somebody who really cares about the environment, I'm very concerned if you are allowing a 100,000 square foot cultivation center or 75,000 square foot cultivation center, and most likely it would be multiple, because it seems like you guys are considering having multiple buildings if later, and if they request that, which it seems like that's something that you would be open to, just based on the conversations. A 22,000 square foot cultivation center uses the same amount of resources as 298 households. It only takes 6 22,000 or 25,000 or 22,000 square foot cultivation centers to use the same amount of resources of the entire Easthampton households. So all of Easthampton. That means that INSA, which is a 100,000 square foot cultivation center, uses half of the amount of resources that the entire Easthampton for households use. All of Easthampton's households use. So, we just had a water ban this summer. I don't know if that has anything to do with cultivation in our community, but we should definitely be considering that when making these decisions. And I'm actually appalled at the lack of conversation around this. I'm actually embarrassed a little bit, because I think it's a really, really important thing to talk about. And it's really just a side note. So I just want to bring that out there, and I'm hoping that you guys will think about that a little bit more when making these decisions.
Well, it is a part of the bylaw itself. Is that right, Jeff? There was the energy efficiency component to it, but it is a real concern, Danielle. It's a very valid point.
I just want to add to that. So water, you can't do anything about water. You either have water or you don't. Like, you can't, there's no practice in place that can give you water. I mean, you could do reverse osmosis, but that's about it. So, I think the point is these use a lot of water, gas, electricity. You can do solar, but, I'm not sure if you could do 100% solar for a 100,000 square foot cultivation center. So that, I just want to put that out there, because this is for me, it's a huge deal.
Danielle, I would certainly encourage you to go and speak to the city council about this when they address this. I saw Harry and then Brenda.
Yeah, I'd like to reply to that. I did some research on that myself about that water situation. I was really concerned about that. Then I talked to a couple of people in the water department. They told me there was absolutely no way of any kind of concern at all about water, because I was really, really concerned about that. And I was reassured that Easthampton has plenty of water. That's one thing we will never run out of. So I'd like to tell that lady that I was really concerned about that. It may, may help her out a little bit.
All right, Brenda?
No.
No? Okay.
I was going to say, I mean, I understand the concern and the questions, but I think there's an entire layer of regulation and requirements that we're not talking about, which is at the state. I think I mentioned this to Ms. Martineau, that I think if you bring it up at City Council, I think there's a way to respond to it. I think it goes beyond the local level. I think what we're not talking about is the regulations that the state has. I think there's some information there that would be useful to review. So I think, there's some things that the planning board does locally for the local regulations, but I think the energy and water consumption is something that gets better handled at the state and their requirements and guidelines. So I would encourage you to take a look at the Cannabis Control Commission stuff, at least as a first place for what these places are required to adhere to.
Thanks, Jeff. Mr. Nelson has a hand up again.
On the water issue, and with Ms. Martineau's concerns about the environmental impact, I know, again, I'm late to this. I wasn't able to attend the previous meetings, but was an environmental impact study done in regards to the Manhan watershed directly behind this property? Because I can tell you, as somebody who uses the Manhan watershed quite often, with hiking with my kids and other activities that we do out there, it seems very, very close to that river, to that watershed. That is, to me, it's pretty sensitive back there. Any changes in the environment around it definitely has. I've seen the impact over many years of development around the area. Was an environmental impact study done?
Are you talking about the Tasty Top property?
Yes.
Yeah, so there's no applicant or application filed for that property. So we haven't viewed anything. We don't know anything about what, if anything, is being proposed for there as far as the planning board. There's nothing before us on that. This is a general highway business bylaw change that's being proposed by the city council.
Okay, I'm sorry.
No problem. I mean, it's all valid questions. I think, those are the kinds of things that you got to pay attention to. Any other comments, public or planning board members? Cott.
Getting back to the 25,000 square foot footprint. So I'm actually for the overall square footage and not for multi-levels of 75,000 square foot. I think that if we're allowed to have multiple 25,000 square foot buildings as it is on a parcel, then overall square footage would work better than just a 25,000 square foot with multiple layers, which would be 3 stories or 2 stories. That would actually help preserve the look of the highway business, and also it would be easy to repurpose later on as a single story structure, I think.
All right.
I got one last thing.
Yep.
Getting back to what Harry was saying about the possible contamination from cultivation to cultivation sites. Now, it's kind of getting me concerned now that we're basing concerns about how there's smell and scent coming from INSA. So if there is some type of leak that gets out from another cultivation facility, it could travel to ours as we're sucking in air from that ventilation system for our plants. It could be of a concern. So maybe if it's a possibility to push this back, if it does go in a cultivation site, push back a little bit further to give that distance between cultivations to avoid contaminations.
All right, thank you, Cott.
Yeah.
All right, so Jeff, you have enough notes on this that you can make this productive?
That's a lot of notes.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing,
I would say to everyone that's here that's talked, either the public or planning board members, I would encourage people to go to the city council meeting and raise these issues there too before this gets voted on. But as far as what we've given you, Jeff, is that enough coverage?
More than enough. Yes, no, it's good. There's clarifying things that are coming out which are helpful. And I think if I understood this kind of referral back was kind of this purpose, is to I think the understanding is that this is not a consent, there's not a unanimous decision on this from the planning board, and I think that's totally fine. But I think the clarifiers that have come up, I think, are important, and that's useful for the city council. So I'll do my best to relay them. I mean, I'm not, I do agree with what you said, Jesse, is it, just to be super clear, and I apologize for the wrong date, it's December 2nd at 6:15. Anyone who's interested in the outcome of this really needs to be there and needs to express these opinions again. Because that's the city council at this point is the group who makes the final decision. I think the input's good, and I think the input makes sense. So I have more clarity on a few of the important things, so that's helpful.
Perfect. All right. Thank you, everyone, for your help on this one. All right. Moving along to the last item on our agenda is the housing production plan. Transmittal and preliminary discussion of draft housing production plan. So, Jeff, my understanding this isn't an action item, right? Where we can jump into this and then move on?
Yes, there's no action required tonight. But part of the reason why it's being introduced is this plan, which is going to set forth goals for affordable housing production over the next 7 years, ultimately gets adopted by city council and the planning board. And then it's referred, it's sent to the Department of Housing and Urban Development for their final approval. And then we are a community that has a housing production plan on file and approved. We are doing this project through a grant. The Executive Office of Environmental Affairs issues planning grants, and we applied to have this study done. It's the housing production plan, and it also will help us look at market rate housing and a general framework for what do we need for housing in the future. And then the final piece is looking specifically at accessory dwelling units. There's a movement to make those something that could be done by right with a building permit. And so there's kind of like really three parts to this project. But what I wanted to do was transmit this draft has gone back once or twice, and then it's the draft that will be used for review, and ultimately we will be seeking the planning board to adopt it. And I know it's getting late, I'm being long-winded. The process that we've laid out right now is for the planning board to have time to review it. I could be sent questions or comments, and then we're working with the consultant. There will be another draft version that will be provided. And then because we're on a roll with joint meetings with the planning board and city council, what got discussed the other night was possibly a joint meeting. Let me just double check the date. I'm not doing so good with those these days. The date that was mentioned was January 20th. It's a Wednesday, and the idea would be the planning board would have another version of the draft and opportunity for questions and comments, and then there would be a presentation on the 20th that would go to the planning board and city council, and both groups would be asked to vote to adopt the production plan and send it to DHCD. It is worth noting that there are two other committees that are involved in this. The Economic Development and Industrial Committee, the EDIC. Since I began 3 years ago, day one, attending their meetings, they've made a connection between housing and economic development, and that a shortage of housing could have a negative impact on economic development. And so they've been pushing for this work to begin to look at housing and our housing needs. And then the other group is the Affordable and Fair Housing Partnership. So that is really Easthampton's housing board. So they've been highly involved working with the consultant. And I think the expectation is that the Affordable and Fair Housing Partnership would also be making part of the presentation on the 20th. One of their overarching goals is to find ways for the city to build more affordable housing and create more affordable housing. So they're part of this. And I think with tweaks and language and some minor changes, I think we expect the plan to be supported by the Affordable and Fair Housing Partnership as a document for the city.
Jim?
Well, I just want to say this is an astoundingly awesome document. I mean, it's really good. It's a long read, but it's just packed full of great stuff. Kudos to the committees that have been working on it. Two concerns. One, the census data that a lot of this comes from, we are in the midst of a new census, so it's a little awkward to me that we're being forced to use this old data when we're right on the cusp of having new data. But I know it's more important that we get this in the book so that we can use it and leverage it to move forward. But I'm wondering if about the final outcome of this and whether we might be able to bring some of the new census data in. The others, of course, that we're at 7% and not the desired 10% and have work to do. And it was noted in there that we've done a lot on this board and through other boards, to really up that, more than many communities, as it showed other communities around. I like seeing that we're still working hard, but even that 3%, it's a tough goal. Hope we can make it. That's all I have to say.
Yeah, the question about the data came up the other night, and I don't have a total clarity on the answer. The consultants suggested that the data was not going, they're not expecting the data to be causing great shifts. There is going to be change in the data and the demographics, but there is the annual community census data that is part of the in-between. And so you're using that in the in-between stages to be at least somewhat aware of the changes in between the 10 years. But I think we are in a position where we need to have the plan approved, within a reasonable amount of time, as soon as possible. It's been in the works for about a year. To make sure that we have an approved plan is important to some extent in the case that we get a 40B application. So I don't think we have the luxury to simply wait. But I think if I heard your question is, could there be any kind of addendum or update that we might be able to incorporate later? I think what the consultant said is the data from census of 2020, it's going to take quite a long time to come back processed and usable. So it might seem like as of January, we'll have new data, but I think the way that it gets crunched and processed, it doesn't appear, to my knowledge, it doesn't appear on January 1st as usable data for cities and towns. So I will ask about that, though, to confirm.
Brenda?
Yeah, I think what Judy said was, wasn't one of the recommendations increase of 35 units annually? She thought that it was going to increase that slightly.
The number of units per year?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And, to be brutally honest, that's affordable units. As designated affordable units, it's incredibly hard to get 35 units per year, built. It's a huge, as Jim said, that's a big request, but it'll allow us to set goals to try to work as hard as we can. I think the expectation, there's very few communities that do this plan. They set that 35 unit goal, and there's unfortunately there's very few communities that achieve that every year. That would bring us to the next level of having our plan be certified, where we're looking to have a plan approved, but then if you meet the unit production each year, then your plan is certified. It's a big lofty goal that Massachusetts has set that many communities can't achieve that.
I did the CPTC course last night. Actually, Judy Barrett did it. She's fabulous. And it did get me thinking. It was on the Fair Housing Act and affordable housing. And she did say, which really helped me, that small developers, in small towns like ours who are doing relatively small projects, just the bureaucracy is overwhelming for them to even think about doing affordable housing. I know we always ask, are any of these units affordable housing? And they're like, no. And so, I wonder how cities and towns go about connecting the goals for, affordable housing with, our ongoing, special permit activities when these developers present 18 units to us. And, I kind of don't understand that, but it did help me understand the complexity of it. And how the bureaucracy is just really burdensome for these small developers. And so, you know, that was really worthwhile. I thought she did a great job, and it kind of helped me understand it's just not a layup. It's just not developers, you know, opting out. It's just, I don't know. I just don't know how planning boards connect the dots between your affordable housing goals and the process of approving, you know, multifamily housing. But I like the mill project because of the workforce housing. That's a really interesting, you know, it's not affordable, but there is a huge group of people in that swath of, you know, annual income that, you know, I was really pleased to see that. I think that's going to be really helpful. So I just wanted to share that.
Great comment. Thanks, Brenda.
Yeah, and that, I'm sorry, that raises one thing to expect with the, in between this version that was provided and the next one is we do have a 2014 plan, and this is an update to that. The 2014 plan laid out a whole bunch of action items, things that we should be considering to do over time. And that was the request the other night, was to they were not in this version, and so they're going to be added back in as action items. And one of them is, to Brenda's point, which the Affordable and Fair Housing Partnership had talked about quite a bit. You know, work with PVPC, DHCD, and local housing nonprofits and developers to establish procedures and incentives that would enable property owners to do small affordable projects on small infill lots within existing homes or buildings. And so the goal will reappear. The hardest part is making it happen and making some of the financial parts of it on the developer side work. But I think that should be a goal moving forward, is to make it easier for small developers to do these units, because that's probably like a huge gap that we're not capturing that right now. Because I think a small developer forced with that question will just say, I'm not going to do the project. And I think that's been observed a few times in Easthampton.
I think the ADU is, the ordinance committee or the city council is taking that on. What about the 2-family by right in single family lots? Is that underway? Is the city council thinking about that? Because that's the other key component, is to make, you know, duplex building just by right for, you know, to Judy's point, if you're going to build a single family with 5-6 bedrooms, why can't you build a duplex with 2 bedrooms in each?
Yeah.
You know, so I thought that was really interesting. And I just wondered, has that been talked about, or is that in the works at all?
I think it's going to come up. I think it'll come up directly in response to this plan. I unfortunately will get, as a community, we're going to get a laundry list of things to do, but prioritizing a few of them, the accessory dwelling units, you know, there's a lot of momentum on that one. And then I think, something like the duplexes, you know, and that's why it's important. I think that's why it's important for the planning board to see these plans, because in, let's say, a couple months, you know, we may be back having public hearing on zoning amendments that might enable more housing to be built. So yeah, I think it's a good point, Brenda. I don't think there's anything right now on the duplexes, but I'm not trying to suggest it's like low hanging fruit, but it would be potentially a little bit easier than some of the more challenging ones that will fall down on the list. So I think that's a great observation.
So Jeff, what's our next step on this process? What do we need to do here?
I guess my request would be, you know, at some point to review this document at your leisure. The first part is all the data. The middle part is a little bit of context. And then the latter part is going to be kind of goals and strategies. You could pick your most important part, but the goals and strategies will be important moving forward. And the updated draft, you know, I'm expecting hopefully within like 2 or 3 weeks. So then you would have what is considered like the final version to move forward. Then I think ultimately it would be to try to schedule a joint meeting with the city council to look at adopting it.
And that's when we formally recommend it to the city council to adopt, or we recommend it to the mayor to sign it, or we'll figure that out. We'll figure out what our vote is between now and then.
My understanding is that DHCD wants a vote of the planning board and a vote of the city council to adopt it.
Oh, okay. All right.
Okay.
Okay, I do have a couple members of the public here, so if anybody who's listening is here to provide any comments or questions, again, you can unmute yourself, you can raise your hand, you can turn on your camera, raise your virtual hand. All right, doesn't look like it. So, all right, so I guess we don't have to take any action on this tonight, and we'll just try to read this draft in the interim before we get a final version to meet with the city council on. All right, so Jeff, are we done? Can we be done?
Yeah.
Thanks, Jeff.
Harry.
Oh, Harry's got something.
Yeah, just to give you an idea what we're up against with the housing. When we were taking apart the Street Village back quite a few years ago, I asked a lady from Northampton about what we have to do to get Easthampton up to code. And she told me we have to build at least 4 or 5 Part of the Street villages. So that'll give you an idea just how much housing we have to create in this city to get that 10%.
We have had a few big projects since then, so we're in good, not great shape on that front. And query whether you want to get to the 10% just so that you can cancel more affordable housing projects in the future. But it's always good to add more. So getting to 10% on its own is a good thing. But we'll leave it at that for now.
Well said. I motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
I'm so grateful. All right, to adjourn. James.
Aye.
Austin.
Aye.
Chris.
Aye.
Brenda.
Aye.
Harry.
Aye.
And I am an aye. Thank you all for another long night. Much appreciated. Thanks, Jeff.
See you next week.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, next week.